Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at what is potentially the strongest deck of the current format, Gaia Metarion. So this deck has won 6 out of 8 tournaments that have happened since the latest box came out. This deck is absolutely everywhere on the ladder, everyone's talking about this deck. This deck has topped more than any other deck in this entire format, but it is still the first week. That being said, it is looking like this is going to be the deck to beat. This is definitely at least positioned to be the strongest deck going into the GRF. So I thought we'd take a look at it, break it down, and show us some replays. So the first thing we'll do is take a look at the skill. Now we did already look at this skill a few times, especially we did just do the Hero Gaia deck, but I think it's still important to go over it. So Chivalrous Celerity can be activated if all of the monsters with 1600 or more attack in your constructed deck are monsters with 2300 attack and 2100 defense, and or level 5 or lower dragon type normal monsters. So once again, Gaia and Curse of Dragon. Send one normal monster from your deck to the graveyard to make one face-up level 5 or higher monster on your field gain 600 attack until the end of this turn. That's already quite good. We can set up our graveyard, we can boost the attack of our monsters, and that 600 is actually very, very relevant. And then the really, really broken part of the skill, then you can add a normal monster and or polymerization from your deck or graveyard to your hand once per duel. And that is absolutely insane because basically we can use that to get effectively an entire extra boss monster onto the board, and every boss monster in this deck is very high impact. So first things first, battle-tested Gaia the Fierce Knight. You contribute summon this card in attack position by attributing one face-up level 5 or higher monster. So the intended target for this is always going to be the Curse of Dragon. But one other card that you can use for it is actually the Palace Gargoyle, which is actually a really cool card. So we can send one card from our hand to the graveyard to increase this card's level by 1 until the end of this turn. So what we can do is we can summon this out, increase its level, then use the skill with our Gargoyle to boost its attack. If we need to, we can grab any normal monster and polymerization to our hand. So there is some interesting stuff we can do with that, but namely we contribute it to summon out battle-tested Gaia the Fierce Knight as well. So already very, very good combo. We can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard. This turn, this card's name becomes Gaia the Fierce Knight. Then you can fusion summon by shuffling this card from your field and one monster from your field or graveyard into the deck as materials. So what we would ideally do is already have Curse of Dragon in the graveyard and then fuse into that. Then we'd use our skill on whatever fusion monster we summon. Let's say it's Swift Gaia. Boost this up to 32. Then we'd get to dump another normal monster into the graveyard, maybe the Curse of Dragon again. And then maybe we add polymerization and any normal monster based on what's in our hand. So there's a lot going on here. Battle-tested Gaia the Fierce Knight is definitely one of the key value pieces of the deck. It is borderline kind of broken and really, really the heart and soul of the deck. Next up, we have Rising Light Angel Essel, and this card is so powerful in this deck. I actually think this deck is a lot better going second, and if you get Essel going second, it actually is insane. So during a turn in which you have not special summoned a monster, send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard, then if you activate this effect during the first turn of the player going second, you can special summon one monster from either player's graveyard. So ideally, we're going to be getting back something like battle-tested Gaia. We could also be digging for any level 5, such as Palace Gargoyle or Curse of Dragon, or we could just be digging for any of our fusion materials and basically use our skill to complete a fusion with them. So Rising Light Angel Essel, a lot of the time is basically just going to be a +1. It can also set up our graveyard, and its stats aren't that bad, with 1000 defense, meaning you won't get pierced over for too much. Then we have Palace Gargoyle. We've already talked about this card, but it does have 1200 defense, which is another bonus. Palace Gargoyle's only real negative is that it is a body that will have to get on the field. So we don't really want to be ending our turn with Palace Gargoyle on the field. So in best case scenario, we'll tribute over it to get out a battle-tested Gaia, and then we've got maximum value from it. Otherwise, it does kind of have to sit on the board, and it can be a little bit of a weakness. We have the 2 copies of Curse of Dragon. Now, 2 copies are in here because 1, drawing into them is not too bad. It will turn on our skill. And 2, there is oftentimes some plays we can make where we want to throw 1 into the graveyard and add 1 into our hand. Then we can do like multiple fusion plays in a single turn. Curse of Dragon also can be brought back with Star Restart. So having 1 in the graveyard to be used as fusion and then having 1 in the graveyard to bring back can also be a valid strategy as well. There's a lot you can do with this, which is why I've chosen to play 2. Next up, we have Serpents, just the one of. So some people are playing more than just the 1 copy. I personally quite like just the singular copy. We are also only playing a 1-of copy of Vitristar in the extra, but basically the skill lets us take any normal monster we want and put it in the graveyard, which means if we need Serpents, we can just go and get it with this skill. So we only really need 1, and it can kind of act as a garnet that we can throw into the graveyard as and when we need it, so we're quite happy with that. The downside to only running 1 is if we are trying to draw into half of a fusion, we now have less copies of half of a fusion to draw into, which can be annoying when we want to use our skill, which can get the other half of a fusion and a polymerization spell, and we just don't have half of a fusion to use. Then there's Sword Dancer, again, very, very important because we are playing the 2 copies of Assura Star, and this is always going to be the card we want to be going into, and it is very, very powerful to be able to go into that. And then the 3 copies of Actor because we need it to go into our fusions. Finally, Babysitter Goat, because having an extra trap card be live is really, really good. And once again, we don't need to play 2 or 3 goats because our skill will dump it to the graveyard, which means King's Majesty should be live most of the time. For our Legend spell, Polymerization is necessary for the skill, but Polymerization is really, really good. So Polymerization is maximum value if we can use this on monsters that require tributes from our hand, but the primary way it usually ends up seeing play is to get 2 cards from our hand, or 1 card from our hand and 1 card from our field, onto the board when we only have 1 free slot on the board to actually summon monsters. Because if we want to summon a fusion monster, typically we need to have 2 spaces on the board. We summon 1, summon 2, fuse them together. We then have another open space, for example. If we already have 2 occupied spaces, and then we have 2 fusion material in hand, for example, we can still use Polymerization to fill up that 3rd spot, which is really, really powerful. Then we have 2 copies of Dragon's Inferno. This is because we are playing Curse of Dragon, we are playing Serpenta, and one of our primary fusion monsters we'll be going into is Swift Gaia, the Dragon Champion, who is also a dragon, which means Dragon's Inferno should be live a lot of the time, and having extra ways to pop back row is always really, really good. This basically means we have the Assura Star. If we need to, we can use Conqueror of Champions, but I would almost always recommend attacking directly with this, depending on the situation. So I'd rather use a Dragon's Inferno rather than use the Gaia Conqueror of Champions to pop back row. Then we have Starry Start. Some players have been cutting this card, but I think when you're playing such a healthy amount of Metarion bodies, being able to bring them back and potentially get out 2 Metarion fusion monsters in a single turn is really, really powerful. As well as we already said, we can bring back Curse of Dragon, which then turns on our skill. Also, we can bring back Curse of Dragon and then just immediately tribute it for battle-tested Gaia, which is another really strong play. We're on the 3 copies of Fusion, because again, we're playing the 2 copies of Starry Start. We want to be making our Fusion monsters as much as physically possible, so Fusion does make sense in this deck. Then we're playing Negate Attack. Again, we've gone back and forth over this and Trap Hole. I think Trap Hole is going to be better a lot of the time, especially if you know you're playing into Gaia, because a lot of the time Gaia or Gaia Metarion or Gaia Hero will just sit there and try and pop as many of your back row as possible, and you won't actually get to use your Negate Attack. But if Negate Attack does stick and it does get used, it generally has higher value. Now, there is a debate because Trap Hole gets rid of a monster, whereas Negate Attack just stops the 3 attacks for the turn. So I don't think it is quite a very obvious decision whether one is better and one is worse, but I do like Negate Attack in this build at the moment. Then we have Buffered Slime, again, really, really strong. It is a little bit awkward because with a lot of the Metarion boss monsters running around, they don't really care for Buffered Slime, and that also carries over to Candy Live and the Dragon Fusion deck. So Buffered Slime is going to be useful all the time, but enough of the time you're getting pierced over by Swift Gaia and attacked directly with Conqueror of Champions that I think Buffered Slime does come up. And then King's Majesty is just fantastic. This works against absolutely everything, and this gets even better value because, again, we can just dump that 1 of Garnet Goat into the graveyard, which is really, really good. Just being able to stop anything regardless of level is so, so valuable and so, so powerful. So going over to the extra deck, we do have Metarion Assura Star. Being able to, again, pop any back row, really, really powerful. But popping monsters out the way can be even better, and it can be ways that we do OTK our opponent. Also, it's really good into warrior decks. And guess what? Some Gaia decks will leave warriors on the field. Hero decks will leave heroes on the field that are warriors, so we can just gain all of that attack and occasionally OTK our opponent through that as well. Then we have Conqueror of Champions. Again, we can either attack directly or pop a back row, but we only get to use these effects on the first turn it is summoned. So after that, it becomes a 2600 vanilla, which is not as good. I would, again, almost always attack directly with this card because getting 3200 damage out of nowhere, because we can use the skill to buff its attack, is really powerful. Now, if you've got lethal on the board, if you can just guarantee your opponent's back row isn't anything, then obviously pop the back row. But I do think attacking directly with this card is almost always the correct decision. Then we have Swift Gaia, which again, very, very powerful. Getting piercing on a 3200 attack monster, really, really good. And quite oftentimes you can make 2 of these in a single turn and pierce over for a ridiculous amount of damage on the first turn. As well as getting that plus, if you have 0 cards in your hand, that free draw is really, really powerful as long as you draw into something you can play. Because quite often you'll see Gaia players end on double Swift Gaia. And if you are able to get 2 draws off of that, that is such, such high value. Then there's Vitristar, which again does come up. This is still a very, very powerful card. We can change our opponent's monsters to face-up attack to get at their life points, or we can change to face-down defense. If they have lower defense, we can then pierce over them with Swift Gaia, which again, really, really powerful. Or we can flip down a monster and destroy it with a Shuristar, which is also really, really powerful. So what this deck typically wants to do is amass a board of as many big fusion monsters as physically possible. It's not too far-fetched to basically like turn 2, end on a board of like Swift Gaia, Shuristar, Vitristar, and then just absolutely decimate your opponent. We can just destroy a load of their back row, we can attack over what monsters they have, and a lot of the time, if they don't have any trap cards to stop us, we will just win the game on the spot. With this deck, I have won on turn 2 several times. It's not actually that rare, which is why I think the deck is so strong. Being able to just randomly kill your opponent out of nowhere, as well as dismantling all of their back row a lot of the time, can be unbelievably powerful. And I think especially the part of the skill that just lets us get polymerization to our hand is so, so good. So basically what we're going to want to do is, in an ideal world, get out the battle-tested Gaia, use its effect to fuse into one of our boss monsters. Then we're going to use our skill to give our battle-tested Gaia that extra 600 attack, put it up to that 32. Then if we have any monster in our hand that we can make a fusion out of, so that would be a Serpenta, a Sword Dancer, an Imaginary Actor, or another copy of Battle-Tested Gaia, we can then use our skill, grab the other half of its fusion, grab the polymerization, and then slam that down as well. If, for example, we have like a Starry Start, we just have a really, really cracked hand, we can basically get out yet another fusion, and the deck is just so, so good at doing what it does. And that's why, again, Essel giving you that free +1, and especially if that +1 is a good card, can be really, really powerful. So this deck can, though, find itself not really doing much. If, for example, you just open a bunch of spell traps, or you open a bunch of monsters, but you don't have a way to access a level 5 monster, you're just going to be setting a bunch of cards and passing. But this doesn't happen too often, but it does still come up. There will still just be some non-games where you just don't draw into what you need to win, as well as we had a few games against dragons where we haven't had access to a level 5, or if we have had access to a level 5, it would have meant just like summoning out just a dragon champion, attacking into our opponents, getting a little bit of pierce, and then we turn on their skill. So we don't really want to do that until we have the means to apply a lot of pressure. So generally in that kind of situation, we do kind of stall out and kind of hope that we draw into what we need. But again, giving them time to set up as well can also be a bit of a negative. So overall, I think this deck is actually really fun. I think despite the fact a lot of people don't like this deck because it can just kill you out of nowhere. People don't like this deck because it was free, basically, and therefore everyone is playing it on ladder, so it's absolutely everywhere, so it's got that kind of stigma attached to it. I do think the deck is actually still really fun. I think being able to basically run some of these one-offs that you can dump into the graveyard to turn on specific skills and effects is really, really cool. I think finding a cool use for Palace Gargoyle is also really, really cool. And I do think the Gaia fusion monsters are also really, really cool. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not the biggest Metarion fan, just because the type change beam Metarion meta still kind of looms in the background, and I'm just like, I really didn't like Metarion during that period. But I do think the Gaia stuff is really cool, and I do think the strongest way to play Gaia is with these Metarion cards. I personally prefer the hero version of this deck, but I can't deny a Shuristar on its own makes this deck worth playing, let alone the fact we also have access to Vitristar, which is also just fantastic. So realistically, if you're looking for what is probably the strongest deck, what I consider the strongest deck, and what statistically, after the tournament results, has proven itself to be the strongest deck, that would be this. So pick it up, play it, and see what you think. But let's throw in some replays so I can show you what I've been talking about.